We're now going to begin the clothing and accessories part of the tutorial. To begin this process, I just brought in two new references so that we can create the clothing and accessories based off of this character reference sheet. For the accessories, I'm going to be starting off with everything as a low poly and just adding in details where necessary. So we're not going to have to retopologize any of the accessories or clothing that we're going to be adding to our character. To start off, we're going to create the horns by adding a cylinder to our scene. And positioning that at the top of our character's head. I'm going to go ahead and delete this face here because we won't be needing it. And I'm going to go into edge selection mode and just start extruding our horn out and shaping it to fit in with the reference. I'm just going to go in and readjust this by hand, not really directly following the reference so that it looks a little bit more natural. The final thing that I'm going to do is select on the horns and change it to shading smooth so that it looks a little bit more polished. For the next part of this clothing and accessory section, we're going to add in our robe. To start that, I'm going to add in a cylinder and I'm going to delete the top and bottom faces. And I'm just going to go into this top edge loop and scale it down to fit around our waist. Now that we have the bottom part of the robe created, we're going to cut out some of the geometry to create this slit in the middle. Okay, that's looking good. Now we're going to go ahead and create this upper part of the robe that turns into the arm and folds over on this side to create a bunching fabric effect. To do this, we're going to go into edge selection mode and just start to extrude our geometry and drape it in a way that looks like fabric. Now that this draped part is created, we're going to go ahead and start to bring up this side of the robe for the sleeve. Now that we have this side part of the robe created, we can go ahead and create the sleeve. To do that, I'm going to add in a new cylinder and scale that down and position it on top of our arm. Now I'm just going to go in and dissolve every other edge loop because we don't need to work with that much geometry. Now we can select our sleeve and our bodice, go into edge mode, and we can start to connect these faces to join them as one. We can now start to extrude this part of the rope upward, and eventually it will connect back into the sleeve. Now that we have the shape of our robe completed, I'm just going to finish it off by bringing it around the top of the shoulder and connecting it back over to the back of the robe. Okay, now we've got our robe all connected around the shoulder and the sides where it needs to be. Now it's time that we just go in and tweak things and polish it up so that it's ready to add in a little bit more detail. Now that we're finished modeling the robe, we can go in and start to add in some of the smaller accessories. I'm going to start with the belt, and with this belt loop right here, I'm going to add a cylinder and scale that down and position it about where that belt loop is on our character reference. We are now going to create the rope part of our belt, and we're going to do that by adding in a circle to the scene, scaling it down a bit to be around the thickness that we want our rope belt to be. I'm going to just go ahead and isolate this so that we can work directly with just our belt object. I'm going to go into the front perspective view so we can get a better look at how we're setting this up. Rotate it along the x-axis by 90 degrees so it's facing forward. Gonna go into edit mode and select the whole circle, turn on grid snapping, and move it so that our circle lines up perfectly with our origin point so that the edge of the circle is at 0, 0. I'm going to go back into object. Now that we're back in object mode, our pivot is still at the origin. So what we're going to do now is we're going to copy this circle and we're going to rotate it around on the Z axis. Now that we have all of our circles, I'm going to select them all. I'm going to object and join so that they all become one object. For circles join, I'm going to add on the screw modifier and switch it to the x-axis so we've created a cylindrical shape that is being created by all of our 4 circles. Now when we increase our screw value, it creates a rope looking effect by extending out all of the 4 circles that are being used to create this screw. I'm going to set this to a value of around 7.6 because I think that this is a good enough stretch between all of our circles. When we increase the iterations, it makes our rope a little bit longer, so we can just keep on adding that to get a rope however long we need for our character's belt. Now, to be able to shape our belt, we're going to go ahead and add in a Bezier curve, and we can just go ahead and scale that up so we have a good distance to work with for our belt. Now I'm going to go into edit mode for the curve, and we're going to subdivide it a few times so that we have more control points to work with. I think this will be enough for the purposes that we're using it for. Go back into object mode and select on our rope. We're going to go in here and add in the curve deformer. And with the eyedropper tool, we're going to select the Bezier curve that we just created. Now when we switch this to the Z-axis, our rope will follow along with the Bezier curve. When we go into the Bezier curve and into edit mode, we can move our curve around and the belt will follow it. I'm now going to use our setup rope to fit this around our character's waist to create the belt. Next, we're going to create this second layer of the robe. This green layer is a little bit behind the front red layer. And to do this, I'm just going to duplicate our robe object. I'm going to go into edit mode, into wireframe mode, and then the front view. And I'm going to select, I'm going to go into face mode, and I'm going to select the parts of the robe that I'm going to be actually duplicating. So now that I've selected that bottom part, I'm going to hold Control Shift and drag over the entire thing to invert the selection. I'm just going to delete those faces. The next accessory we're going to add is the shoes. To create the scarf, we're going to start by adding in a cube to our scene. We're going to go and add a few modifiers. We're going to start by adding a subdivision surface modifier. I'm going to scale that up to 2, so there's a little bit more geometry to work with. Next, we're going to go in and add the shrink wrap modifier. Next, I'm going to add on a solidify modifier, which is going to give a little bit of a thickness to our scarf. Now that we have all three pieces of our scarf completed, we can just go ahead and select them all and join them together. For the hair, we're going to start by creating two curves. We're going to create a path curve, which is going to control the direction and shape of our hair. And we're also going to create a circle curve, which is going to affect the overall shape of our hair. Under the Geometry tab, we're going to go into the Objects, and we're going to select our circle as our object that gets beveled around our path curve. Now, when we go into our circle curve, we can go into Edit mode, and we can control the different points that will affect the shape of our hair strands. Now that we have the general shape of our hair curve created, we want to scale the individual points so that we can create a tapering effect at the top and bottom. So if we try to just scale it normally, you can't scale the point. So what we're going to have to do is use Alt S, and then we can scale the mesh around that general point. So now we have created a hair curve that tapers off at either end. I'm just going to Shift D to drag to create multiple of these that we are going to be using to create the bangs. And to do that, I'm just going to position them in their general place and then go into vertex mode to start to shape them into the shape of these hairs here from our reference. I'm just going to continue this process around the rest of the head, and I'll come back when I'm done. For our final accessory, we're going to add in the memory knot on the side of the arm. Now that we've completed all of the accessory modeling, it's time to begin the retopology of our character's body.